Hi, I'm Ken Mann, the Senior Managing Director at Heritage Equity Partners. Thanks for joining our video series. Here we'll endeavor to do short interviews with industry experts to tease out information on topics that should be of interest to you. Each interview will be very brief, but will be filled with nuggets of useful information to you. If you feel that you need to take a deeper dive on today's topic, please contact me at the email address below or phone number below, and I'll connect you with today's industry expert. Thanks very much, and I hope you enjoy today's interview. Let's jump into today's topic and meet our guest expert. Here's a lament and question I've heard from many a troubled business. My lender is fatigued, he's tightening availability, my business is being choked, I need to find more cash. How can I find new money? Here with me today to answer that very question is my friend and fellow Marylander, David Dean. David's a member of Cole Schotz Bankruptcy and Corporate Restructuring and Litigation Department in the Baltimore office. He was recently awarded the M&A Advisors 40 Under 40 Legal Advisors and recognized by his peers in Super Lawyers Maryland Rising Stars for bankruptcy and creditor-debtor rights, and Maryland's Best Lawyers for bankruptcy and creditor-debtor rights, insolvency, and reorganization. David focuses his practice on corporate reorganizations in and out of bankruptcy court, as well as complex litigation in federal and state courts. David's bankruptcy practice is focused primarily on the representation of debtors and unsecured creditors committees in Chapter 11 bankruptcy cases throughout the United States. His prior engagements include things ranging from a small cable TV provider that we worked with David on to retail cases with over $1 billion in revenue. Locally, David has served as the chair of the Baltimore chapter of the Bankruptcy Bar Association for the District of Maryland, and he's currently a director of that organization. Nationally, David's very active in the American Bankruptcy Institute. He's currently a member of the advisory board for the ABI's Mid-Atlantic Conference. So David, you know a thing or two about what a company should do when it finds a banking relationship that starts to sour. I appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you.
As a lender starts to require reserves or starts to disqualify buckets of collateral like AR or inventory, or maybe starts to reduce advance rates, what are some of the steps that a borrower in that situation can take to manage cash flow?
Thanks, Kim. Well, I appreciate you having me here. Let me start out by saying that most of the time when a client comes to me for this kind of advice, these are very difficult discussions. And one of those things I ask the client to do is to do what are called iron-fisted controls in their cash flow management. And what I mean by iron-fisted controls is essentially to have very strict protocol put in place where cash flow spending is limited only to the most critical of things, especially in an interim period before we can figure out what the problem is and come up with a solution. Most clients and companies, when they come to you for cash flow advice, will tell you, well, I've already cut this company down, I've already made the layoffs, I've already cut the expenses, this thing is bone dry. But then once you start to peel the layers off the onion, you realize that it's not as bone dry as the client thinks, first of all. And many times, the company is making the wrong kind of cuts. An easy example of this is I've been involved in many cases where the company is continuing to pay its unsecured vendors who aren't even working for them anymore, yet their secured creditor isn't get paid. An even worse example is I've had cases where companies have come in, they're continuing to pay their vendors, yet they haven't made payroll taxes in 8, 9, 10 months. Obviously, these are huge problems, and problems that would lead to personal liability for some of the individuals in control of the checkbook. So these are the kind of problems that I see when folks come to me with cash flow management issues. And so what I like to do initially to help the client cut the right kind of cash flow is look at all the obligations from a legal standpoint to see who's in the right order of priority. If you need to make cuts, who do you need to stop paying and why from a legal standpoint. But then from a business standpoint, you also want to look at appropriate cuts from a business standpoint, including whether there are certain segments of a client's business that are unprofitable that could be let go, or certain locations that could be let go. And the overall goal of all of this, from a cash flow standpoint, is to create an adequate runway so that the client or the prospective client can have adequate time to make something positive happen. That's the overall goal.
Okay, understood. And so during that initial period, what is your advice in general to this cash-starved company with how to deal with its vendors?
Yeah, so vendors can be vendor is sort of a subcomponent of dealing with cash, but it's a very important one that I think rightfully so deserves a separate discussion. And the overall thing I'll say about vendors is it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. First of all, you have to identify what vendors are critical to you. And the ones that are not critical, either because they can be easily replaced or because the vendor isn't being used anymore at all, those unfortunately are going to be the first ones that I'm going to identify for the client to stop paying pretty much immediately, at least until we figure out what the cash flow situation is. For those critical vendors, and by critical I mean ones that you cannot live without, you need them for the future success and revenue of the business, you're going to have to probably deal with them on a one-on-one basis and evaluate the payment terms. Can I get extensions of credit from this? What are my relationships with each vendor? Am I going to have to pay cash on delivery or COD for certain vendors in exchange for making some catch-up payments on amounts that have been overdue? So the key here is identifying the most important vendors and then coming up with a game plan, an overall game plan that evaluates the most critical vendors on a vendor-by-vendor basis and looking at the specific facts of the case that you're dealing with and coming up with an approach for each and every one of them.
Okay, that makes sense. So by that point in time, I'm guessing in our example case here that this is going to be a company that's mostly on a COD basis. But if there are vendors that are still providing credit, is it okay to continue to buy goods on credit?
If you believe that you reasonably will be able to pay them, then you can continue to take the goods on credit. But if you know that you're going to stiff them, if you're planning for a bankruptcy or you just know that you don't have the ability to pay, then I legally could not advise a client, and I would not think the client would want to take the goods on credit.
What should the company do to begin to find new money or replace its existing lender?
Well, the key is to have a good business plan in place that assesses your current situation. The only way you're going to be able to find new money is if you have a good business plan and you come up with not just a solution, you don't just identify problems, but you come up with solutions to the problems. And you also have to determine, well, why is my lender squeezing me? Some would say trying to get rid of me, leading to the need to try to find new money. Right. But most of the time, you have a situation where the bank is putting the squeeze on you for a really good reason, because your cash flow is poor, your covenants, your collateral base is not good. And in those situations, you're probably not going to be able to replace your money with an existing traditional big bank type of lender. And that's where someone, if I'm counsel, I would recommend, first of all, if the client can pay for it, a financial advisor to help devise the cash flow models, probably a 13-week budget, but some type of budget to put in front of the potential new lenders in a pitch book or something of that nature. And then probably brings someone else in if the cost dictated it, like an investment banker such as yourself, to try to go out and find those opportunities with potential new lenders, higher risk lenders, or investors. And so that would be the approach. It doesn't always work like that because sometimes the investment bankers are already out looking for the money and they're bringing me in. Sometimes I'm the first professional involved, and then I'm telling the client that they may need another professional to help actually find the money. And I would be in this role more of a quarterback to make sure that the client's working with the financial folks in a way that puts together a good cohesive business plan to make the pitch to the potential lenders or investors that would lead to hopefully extension of new credit from a new lender or a new investor.
Okay, and then in your experience, what are some of the common mistakes that the troubled company makes or management makes in this phase of the process when they're very first just about to go look for new money?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, you can't just identify a problem. Let's say you need to approach your existing lender to buy new time while you're looking for that new money.
Right.
You can't just come to the lender and say, I have a problem, here's the problem, please help me. You have to come up with a solution. And so, in addition to doing a business plan, as I already suggested, many times what I'll do with the existing lender to buy more time to allow that finding money process, the search for money to play out. Because as I said, you want to create a runway for your client to make something positive happen. So one of the things you want to do in addition to a business plan itself is what I have done in the past in many cases is propose a formal term sheet as a starting point for counsel for the existing lender that sets out all the terms and conditions that we would agree to for a loan modification if that's what's needed, or in some cases a more robust forbearance agreement. And what that accomplishes is that you create credibility with your existing lender. The client is now cloaked with someone who they view as a serious lawyer, but also a serious company with a serious plan to fix the problem, not just for themselves, but for the lender. The last thing I'll mention is another big problem that I see in these kind of situations is timing. Clients or companies who can foresee problems and come to you well in advance of covenants getting tripped and defaults getting made and loans being accelerated provide me as counsel a much higher degree of success. If clients come to you in the hypothetical that I mentioned where you're 8 months behind on payroll and you can't make, obviously you're 8 months behind on payroll tax and you can't meet your next payroll and your vendors are 3 months out and you're in default with your lender, you're going to have very limited options no matter how good your lawyer is. So getting to counsel and other professionals early enough to help you come up with a game plan and create that runway is the key to success.
Absolutely agree with you on that. It's sad when you come into a case and somebody has taken too long to seek help and then there's very little you can do to help at that point.
Agreed.
Well, I want to thank you again for taking the time to sit down with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
good to
thanks
be with
a lot.
you.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah. How can somebody reach you or your firm if they're interested in talking to you further about these topics?
Well, they can always email me at ddean@coleschotz.com. It's COLESCHOTZ.com, or my office number is 410-528-2972.
Excellent. Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot.
I hope you enjoyed today's interview and were able to come away with at least one very useful piece of information. Please keep your eye out for emails from us announcing future guests and other topics of interest. Please feel free to reach out to me if I can be of any assistance at the email or phone number on the screen, as well as if you have a topic that you'd like to hear about or want to make any suggestions for a guest expert. Thanks again.